Welcome back to the Legacy Crusaders YouTube channel. This is Benji, and welcome to the Ask Judgeman series, where you can ask me any question about a Yu-Gi-Oh card interaction. So today I wanted to talk briefly about simultaneous effects happening on a chain, and then going into the difference between inherent and non-inherent summons. So recently there was an update to the rulebook, and it has a minor effect on what we were talking about last episode, which was missing timing. So we're going to talk about that right now. So let's start by imagining that you have a Dante of the Burning Abyss, and it has the Xyz materials of Graph and Farfa, and that's on your side of the field. So we have those overlaid, and your opponent is going to have their own Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon. So he can negate the activation of a monster effect once per turn. So we're going to play around with that idea. And we're going to have that happen by activating Raigeki. So Raigeki is going to destroy Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss, which is going to send into the graveyard along with Graph and Farfa. Now that'll make you meet the trigger conditions of 3 different effect monsters at the same time. Now, when multiple triggers of the same type happen, the turn player activates theirs first, their mandatory effects, then the non-turn player activates their mandatory effects, followed by the turn player's non-mandatory effects, and then the opposing player's non-mandatory effects. And if there are multiples of each of those types of effects, you can stack the chain in any order you like. And in this case, we have 3 effects that are all non-mandatory effects. That is Dante, Graph, and Farfa. And what order can we use them in? Now, the order in which you'd use these effects is entirely up to you. So I'm just going to put them all on the screen again, and we'll think about it. Perhaps you want to ensure that the Crystal Wing cannot negate the effect of Graph or Dante. So you can chainlink these in the following order. Chainlink 1, Dante, Traveler of the Burning Abyss, to add the Graph back to your hand. Chainlink 2, Graph, Male Branch of the Burning Abyss, to ensure you get to summon your Seer or your Skarm. And Chainlink 3, Farfa, Male Branch of the Burning Abyss, targeting the Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon to banish it from the field. Now, because of the chainlink order, Crystal Wing can only negate the last thing on the chain, because Crystal Wing is a win effect, which we were talking about last time. Win effects say that their effects can only be activated at the time that is appropriate. And in this case, these 3 chains all had to be activated at the same time. So the last one in the chain, Farfa, is the only one that Crystal Wing has the opportunity to respond to. And this is the way that players in the Monarch era would play around Solemn Strike, by normal summoning under Return of the Monarchs, and you can just make Return Chainlink 2, and then Solemn Strike could not be chained to a spell card. So by making Farfa Chainlink 3, you force the opposing player to either negate Farfa or not negate Farfa, but at the same time he has no choice but to allow the effects of Dante and Graph to resolve. So between last episode and this episode, I think we've covered everything we need to really cover on missing the timing. And if there's any other questions about that, you can just leave them down below in the comments section. And since you clicked on the thumbnail of this video, you are aware we are talking about the difference between an inherent summon and a non-inherent summon. So we're going to start that discussion right now. So I'm going to start off by defining what an inherent special summon is. Now, this is technically not an appropriate word to use because it's nowhere in the rulebook or anywhere in Konami references. But what's been defined by players is an inherent summon is a special summon of a monster that does not start a chain. So that includes any kind of game mechanic special summon, a link summon, a Xyz summon, a synchro summon. And that also includes certain monsters, which are the ones we need to really talk about, which are monsters that can be special summoned from either the hand or graveyard. And it's stated on the card, based on problem-solving card text, in parentheses where they can be summoned from. So some of the more popular and famous examples include that of Cyber Dragon, Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, and a few other cards. All of the Infernoid nor main deck monsters except for Infernoid Decatron. And based on the definition of an inherent summon, all other special summons are cards that either start a chain or are summoned as the result of a chain. So any fusion spell card, at the resolution of the fusion spell, will summon a monster, but the fusion spell was a card effect, so that activated and started a chain. Similarly, a ritual spell would resolve and summon a monster. And then there's a few monsters that actually summon themselves, but activate effects, such as all of the Burning Abyss Mel branches. They say reveal this card to your opponent, and special summon this card. And you could tell that they're effects based on the language and grammar used for it, colons and costs. So if you see semicolons, anything before that is either a cost or an activation condition. So those would be non-inherent summons, Chaos Hunter, and so on. So the following set of cards are very well-known cards that can be used to negate the summon of monsters. So the first one is Black Horn of Heaven, which says when a monster would be special summoned, you can negate that summon and destroy the card. Now, when it says when a monster would be special summoned, implies a special summon that was not achieved by a card effect, because if it were achieved by a card effect, you would have to negate the card effect, otherwise you would miss the timing to negate the summon. For example, if you ritual summon Blackluster Soldier or Super Soldier, the resolution of the spell effect has already successfully summoned Super Soldier, so in that case you can't use a Black Horn of Heaven to negate the summon of a monster summoned by a card effect. So if a card says it negates the special summon of a monster, you have to negate a inherent summon, because you cannot negate an effect with a card that says negate a summon. An effect is not a summon, even if the effect is to summon another card. Solemn Strike has the same issues, so you can't use Solemn Strike to negate a fusion spell or a ritual spell, but you can use it to negate an inherent summon, or the effect of a monster that would summon a card. So you can negate the effect of a card such as Mermail Abyss Megalo, which discards 2 water monsters as cost, and then special summons itself. That's all one big effect. Now, the reason Solemn Warning might actually be one of the better summon negation cards is because it can actually be used in response to cards that include the effect that summons a monster. So you can use Solemn Warning on a ritual spell card, or you can use it on a fusion spell card. Now, what you cannot do is allow those cards to resolve and then negate the summon, because then you've missed the timing. So Solemn Warning needs to be chained to the card effect that would summon a card, or needs to be used in response to an inherent summon. So Solemn Warning is a bit more open than the other cards, but there are some cards you cannot Solemn Warning, and I'm going to bring those up now, because those are the ones that people tend to be surprised by. So let's take a look at those. So there is actually a pretty big list of cards that Solemn Warning cannot negate, and part of the reason is when those cards are activated, they do not summon a card. You probably heard that you can Solemn Warning Macrocosmos, because it does include the effect to special summon Helios from your deck, or you can activate Solemn Warning on Starlight Road, because it includes the effect to special summon Stardust Dragon. And those things are true, but there are cards that, when they are activated, actually don't do anything. And because they don't do anything, those cards do not include the effect to summon a monster. So, for instance, there's Call of the Mummy and Valhalla, some similar cards like that, Zodiac Barrage, Void Imagination. All of those cards have no effect when they actually activate, or an effect that does not include the effect of summoning a monster. They have a trigger effect that can be activated afterwards, but Solemn Warning only negates the activation of spell and trap cards, and for that reason, once the card is already face up on the field, it's already been successfully activated. At that point, any activation you declare is really just the trigger of the effect, and Solemn Warning cannot negate the trigger of a spell or a trap card. It can only negate the activation of a spell or trap card, meaning when the card is placed face up on the field. It can negate the activation of monsters. A monster, no matter where you trigger its effect, is considered to activate, unlike spells and traps, which are only considered to activate when you place them face up on the field. So if you negate the activation of a spell or trap card, you prevent it from ever being played face up on the field. So Solemn Warning cannot negate Call of the Mummy, Zodiac Barrage, or Void Imagination from being placed face up on the field. And when you trigger their separate effect to summon a monster, it's too late to use Solemn Warning, because it needs to be used in response to the activation of a card. So that's going to be probably the most commented questions down below for this video. why can't I do this? And if you do have any more questions on that, please leave that down below. And I have one more thing I wanted to do because this video is running a tad long at this point. So the last thing I wanted to do was to talk about the question that's actually on the thumbnail, which isn't a real question. I haven't actually been getting a lot of questions submitted. So the questions I've been doing have mostly been coming from my own experiences at locals, in addition to things I've seen either on Facebook groups or things I've seen people mention before or talk about before. But if you'd like your actual question to be discussed, please leave that in the comments and I will look them over, and if they're not ridiculous, I'll do my best to answer them. But I had somebody say something about, can I use my MST to negate my opponent's twin twister who's negating my MST, which is just obviously just being a jackass. So I'm going to ignore any question that's intentionally stupid. But in reference to True King's Return, can you negate the activation of True King's Return with Solemn Warning? And the answer is maybe. So it depends on what part of this effect you're talking about. So the effect of True King's Return to special summon a monster from the graveyard can be Solemn Warninged if it's activated upon the flipping of True King's Return. So if you flip True King's Return and say, activate the effect to special summon a monster from the graveyard, then you can Solemn Warning that card, because the activation of the card includes the effect to special summon a monster. And there is a rule that says when you activate a trap card, a continuous trap, and its effect is optional, you either can activate it on activation or you can't. And there are reasons to do both. And the number one reason to not activate it on activation is to avoid getting Solemn Warninged. Because if you activate the card and you don't trigger the effect to special summon a monster, you can't Solemn Warning that card. Now, the reason to activate the effect upon flipping it up is because if you're activating the effect at the same time of flipping it, your opponent cannot Ghost Ogre it. So there are reasons to and not to activate the effect upon flipping it up. So yeah, by flipping it up first, you avoid Solemn Warning. By activating the effect separately, you avoid Solemn Warning and you put yourself at risk of getting Ghost Ogred. Now the opposite can be said as well. If you're afraid of your opponent having Ghost Ogre, you might activate the effect upon flipping it face up in order to avoid getting Ogred, but then you leave yourself at risk of getting Solemn Warninged. But there are some cards that can't be Warninged but can be Ogred, so it might make more sense to do it one way or another. Now, there is a second effect on this card that I really wanted to answer the question about, is whether you can Solemn Warning the effect to Tribute Summon. And the answer to that is, I believe that particular effect, you cannot Solemn Warning when the card is flipped face up. I'm not 100% on that, so that's not the part I actually want to talk about. But if you have more clarification on that, please feel free to leave so in the comments. Because that says, at the resolution of this card, perform a Tribute Summon. So what it really is saying is, at the resolution of this card's effect, you can conduct a gameplay mechanics summon. So that summon is actually not part of the effect of this card. That summon is just a normal summon. So if you activate the effect to do a Tribute Summon using True King's Return, after the resolution of the effect happens, you do a Tribute Summon. That Tribute Summon can be Solemn Warninged because it's not activating as part of as part of the effect of that card, even if the card was already face up. You're negating a normal summon, which you can do, because unlike a fusion spell or something where I said you couldn't Solemn Strike a fusion spell, that monster's coming out as a result of the effect. This monster's coming out as a result of a normal summon that occurs after the resolution of the effect, so it's not part of the effect. Now, it is possible to avoid your normal summon getting Solemn Warninged, and that is by activating this effect as Chain Link 2 or higher, because if this effect activates as Chain Link 2, what will happen is it will resolve, then you'll perform a normal summon, and you have to complete the chain before you can actually add cards to the chain. So you wouldn't be able to Solemn Warning the card that was normal summoned by this card effect in the middle of a chain, but at the beginning of a chain, if it's Chain Link 1, you can actually negate the normal summon of a monster that was summoned by True King's Return. Now, once again, just as a reminder, I am not an official judge, so if anything I say is incorrect, please feel free to correct me in the comments below. I'm fairly certain of anything I say when I say it, but, you know, mistakes happen or misinterpretations can happen on my part as well. So I'll see you guys next time. And if you like what you saw, you can find one of our latest uploads right here. Also, YouTube has recommended this video for you. Click here to make sure you subscribe to our channel to get updates as soon as they occur. See you next time.